The winter in the small town of Maple Creek was harsher than usual this year. The wind blew fiercely, carrying flurries of snow that covered the streets like a thick white blanket. People walked quickly, heads down, trying to shield themselves from the biting cold. On the corner of the street, right in front of a small bakery called Sweet Memory, a young woman named Emma was pulling open the store's curtain. At 25, Emma was known for her warm smile and kind heart among the townspeople. That morning, just like every other, Emma had arrived early. She wanted to prepare the new batch of dough before the first customer arrived. But as she reached for the door handle, her eyes caught sight of something unusual on the bench by the park across the street. There sat an old man, hunched over, shivering violently. His clothes were thin and worn, hardly enough to shield him from the cold. Next to him lay a weathered wooden cane, his hands rubbed together in a desperate attempt to stay warm. Emma stepped closer and noticed a small star-shaped pin on the old man's faded cap. It was a symbol she recognized immediately. He was a veteran. People passed by him without stopping, sparing him only a fleeting glance before moving along. No one offered help. No one even slowed down. Emma's heart ached at the sight. She stood there for a moment, hesitating, then made a firm decision. Turning back, she entered the bakery and opened the drawer on the counter, pulling out her wallet. There was not much money inside. Most of her earnings were reserved for rent and supplies. But some things were more important than numbers in a ledger. Without another thought, she grabbed her thin jacket, stepped back outside, and hurried down the street toward the clothing store at the corner. The small clothing store at the end of the street had just opened. Emma pushed the door gently, a bell chiming overhead. Inside, the shopkeeper, an elderly woman named Mrs. Carter, greeted her with a warm smile. "Good morning, Emma. Out so early in this weather?" she asked. Emma nodded, her breath still visible in the cold air. "I need a warm jacket, something thick and comfortable." Mrs. Carter raised an eyebrow. "For yourself?" Emma shook her head. "For someone who needs it more than I do." Understanding flashed in Mrs. Carter's eyes. Without another word, she led Emma to the back of the store where heavy winter coats hung neatly. Emma's fingers moved quickly across the racks. She chose a thick, insulated jacket with a soft lining. It was not the cheapest, but it looked warm enough for the freezing wind outside. At the counter, Emma handed over most of the cash in her wallet. Her hands trembled slightly, not from the cold, but from the feeling stirring in her chest. Mrs. Carter placed the jacket in a brown paper bag and handed it to Emma with a knowing smile. "You're doing a good thing, dear." Emma thanked her and hurried back into the snowy street. The wind seemed even stronger now, but Emma did not care. Her boots crunched through the snow as she returned to the park bench. The old veteran was still there, curled in on himself, his thin body shaking violently. Emma approached slowly and knelt beside him. "Sir," she said softly. The old man looked up, his blue eyes tired and red from the cold. Emma opened the bag and carefully unfolded the jacket. "Please put this on. It's too cold out here." The veteran stared at her, stunned. For a moment, he could not speak. His lips trembled as tears welled in his eyes. Why would you do this for me?" he whispered. Emma smiled gently. "Because no one should be cold and alone." With trembling hands, the veteran slipped on the jacket. The warmth wrapped around him instantly. Tears streamed down his cheeks. He gripped Emma's hand tightly. Thank you," he said, voice breaking. Emma gave his hand a reassuring squeeze. "Take care of yourself, sir." Without waiting for thanks, she stood up and walked back to her bakery. The image of the old man in the jacket stayed with her long after she returned inside. She had no idea that this small act would change everything the very next day. The next morning, the snow had stopped, but the air remained frigid. Emma arrived early again to open Sweet Memory. She brushed the snow off the bakery steps and unlocked the door. The street was unusually quiet. No customers walked by yet. Emma prepared the first batch of dough, humming softly as she worked. But just as she was about to turn on the coffee machine, a deep rumbling sound caught her attention, the sound of engines. She looked through the window, her breath catching in her throat. 4 old military jeeps were parking along the street in front of her bakery. The vehicles looked well-maintained, their paint faded but clean. On the sides, small American flags fluttered in the cold breeze. Emma frowned in confusion. Veterans? Here? The engines shut off. The doors opened, and a group of elderly men, all wearing military caps and coats, began stepping out. There were at least a dozen of them. They stood tall, despite their age, some leaning on canes, others with medals pinned proudly on their chests. Each carried a box or a paper bag in their hands. Emma's heart began to race. She watched from behind the counter, unsure what was happening. Then, the bell above the bakery door jingled. The group of veterans entered, filling the small space with a sudden sense of purpose and dignity. At the front was a tall man with a gray beard and sharp eyes. He removed his cap and approached the counter. "Are you Emma?" he asked kindly. Emma swallowed and nodded. "Yes, that's me." The man smiled. "I am George. We are friends of Frank." Emma blinked in surprise. "Frank, the old man from yesterday." George continued. "Frank told us what you did for him. He could not stop talking about your kindness. We wanted to come and thank you in person." Emma felt her cheeks flush. "Oh, I didn't do anything special." But before she could finish, George raised his hand gently. To us, it was very special. One by one, the veterans stepped forward, placing the boxes and bags on the counter. Emma glanced at them, her eyes widening. Inside the packages were gifts, hand-knitted scarves, bags of premium coffee from veteran-owned farms, freshly baked goods, books about military history, and in one small velvet box, a polished lapel pin shaped like an eagle. Emma's throat tightened. She was at a loss for words. George smiled. "These are small tokens of our gratitude. You reminded us that kindness still exists in this world." Emma blinked back tears, her voice barely a whisper. "Thank you, but really I only wanted to help." The veterans smiled knowingly. Their presence filled the bakery with a quiet warmth, even as the cold wind howled outside. As the veterans gathered inside Sweet Memory, more people began to notice. Across the street, a few curious passers-by stopped to watch the scene through the bakery's window. Some began taking out their phones to record. It was not every day that a group of decorated veterans visited a small-town bakery in full uniform. Emma, still overwhelmed, tried to compose herself. The counter was now full of thoughtful gifts. Her small act of kindness from the day before it created a ripple she never expected. More veterans continued to arrive. Some came with canes, some arm in arm with their wives. Each brought something small: a jar of homemade jam, a bottle of honey, a handwritten card. The tiny shop soon buzzed with conversation and quiet laughter. The once cold and empty morning had turned warm and alive. Just then, a reporter from the local newspaper entered, camera slung over his shoulder. He had heard about the unusual gathering and came to see it for himself. "Excuse me," the reporter said politely to Emma. "I'm with the Maple Creek Gazette. May I ask what is happening here?" Before Emma could respond, George stepped forward. "We are here to thank this young lady," he said proudly. "She helped one of our own yesterday. In this world, such acts should not go unnoticed." The reporter quickly took notes and snapped a few photos of the veterans with their gifts. Within minutes, the story was posted on the newspaper's online page. "A young woman's kindness melts hearts of local veterans." The headline spread quickly on social media. Soon, dozens of comments and shares appeared. People from across town were moved by the story. Many vowed to visit Sweet Memory to support Emma's bakery. Emma watched all of this unfold with disbelief. She had never sought attention. She had simply wanted to help an old man on a cold day. Now, her small bakery had become the heart of an unexpected story of kindness. The morning passed quickly. Customers began arriving, drawn by the news. Some came to buy bread and pastries, others simply to see the scene they had read about online. Emma greeted everyone with her usual warm smile, though her heart was still racing from the unexpected events of the day. The veterans remained inside, sipping hot coffee and sharing stories among themselves. They had made themselves at home in the little bakery. Around noon, the doorbell jingled again. Emma glanced up and froze. There, Standing in the doorway was Frank, the old veteran from a bench. He looked very different today. He stood taller, his shoulders less hunched, and on his back, he proudly wore the thick jacket Emma had given him. The other veterans immediately noticed and greeted him warmly. Frank shuffled in slowly, supported by a cane, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on Emma. For a moment, the bakery went silent. All eyes turned toward him. Frank made his way to the counter where Emma stood. His hands trembled slightly, though not from the cold this time. "Miss Emma," he began, voice soft but steady. I want to come thank you in person." Emma smiled, her eyes glistening. "I'm so glad to see you, Frank. How are you feeling today?" Frank nodded. "Much better, thanks to you. This jacket, it saved me." He paused, taking a deep breath. "But there's something more." Frank reached into his coat pocket and carefully pulled out a small wooden box. The box was old but polished, its surface worn smooth from years of handling. He opened it slowly. Inside was a military medal, its ribbon still vibrant. Gasps echoed through the bakery. The medal was a distinguished honor, the kind not given lightly. Frank's voice trembled as he spoke. "This was awarded to me many years ago, but it has never meant as much to me as it does now." He looked Emma straight in the eye. "I want you to have it, for reminding me that kindness and honor still exist in this world." Emma's breath caught. She could barely speak. Her hand shook as Frank gently placed the medal in her palm. Tears streamed down her cheeks. I cannot accept this, Frank. It belongs to you." Frank smiled softly. "It belongs with someone who understands what it truly means." The room remained silent, thick with emotion. Even the veterans stood still, their eyes shining with pride and respect. In that moment, Emma realized that her simple gesture had touched far more lives than she could have imagined, and the story was far from over. The days that followed were unlike anything Emma had ever experienced. Sweet Memory, once a quiet little bakery tucked away on a sleepy street, became a place of gathering. People came not just for the bread or the pastries, but for the story of one jacket, one act of kindness, and how it had warmed more than just one man's body. It had warmed an entire community. Veterans from nearby towns began visiting, some out of curiosity, others to simply sit for a while, sip coffee, and talk about the old days. Emma welcomed them all. On the walls of the bakery, a small corner was dedicated to the veterans. Photos, medals, and handwritten notes of gratitude began to fill the space. It was not planned, but it grew naturally, piece by piece. Customers would often pause by the corner, reading the notes and smiling softly. Some left flowers, some left letters. Children from a local school wrote colorful cards, thanking the veterans for their service. Emma never asked for any of this, but every morning when she unlocked the door and stepped inside, she felt a sense of quiet pride. She had created a place where people remembered kindness, a place where forgotten stories were told and honored. Frank became a regular visitor. He would sit by the window, sipping tea, greeting everyone who walked in. Over time, the harsh lines on his face softened, replaced by a calm peace Emma had never seen before. He told her stories about the places he had been, the friends he had lost, and the moments of hope he clung to in the darkest times. Emma listened carefully, never interrupting. Outside, the winter snow slowly began to melt. Spring was on its way. But inside Sweet Memory, the warmth never faded. One crisp morning, several weeks after the story of Sweet Memory had spread across town, Emma arrived early to prepare the bakery. The bell above the door chimed softly as she entered. She tied on her apron, started the ovens, and began kneading dough. Outside, a light frost still clung to the windows. As the first loaf began to bake, the familiar scent of warm bread filled the air. Soon, the doorbell jingled again. Emma turned, expecting to see one of her regulars. But instead, a tall man in a long, dark coat stood at the entrance. He looked to be in his 50s, well-dressed, with sharp features and a serious expression. A briefcase hung from his shoulder. He approached the counter. "Good morning," he greeted in a calm voice. "Are you Miss Emma, the owner of this bakery?" Emma nodded politely. "Yes, I am. How can I help you?" The man smiled faintly. My name is William Carter. I represent a veterans organization based in the city. Emma blinked in surprise. A city organization? William continued, pulling out a small folder from his briefcase. We have heard about what you did here, about the story with Mr. Frank, and how your kindness has brought this community together. He laid the folder on the counter and opened it, revealing a formal letter embossed with a gold seal. Emma leaned in to read. Her heart skipped a beat. It was an official invitation. The organization wanted to honor her at an upcoming ceremony, recognizing her contribution to supporting veterans and fostering unity within the town. Emma's cheeks flushed. I never meant to cause such attention, she said softly. I just wanted to help someone in need. William's smile grew warmer. And that is exactly why we believe you deserve this recognition. Before Emma could reply, the door chimed again. This time, it was Frank, accompanied by George and a few other veterans. They spotted William at the counter and approached with curiosity. William greeted them respectfully. Gentlemen, it is an honor to meet you. Frank glanced at Emma and saw the open letter on the counter. He smiled knowingly. You see, Emma, he said gently, kindness has a way of echoing far beyond what we can see. Emma felt her throat tighten. The bakery had become something more than just a place for bread. It had become a beacon of hope and connection. And now, it seemed, her story was about to reach even further. The following days were a blur of preparations. Word had spread quickly through Maple Creek that Emma was to be honored at a formal ceremony in the city. Neighbors stopped by the bakery to congratulate her. Customers left notes of encouragement. Even strangers from nearby towns began visiting, curious to meet the young woman whose simple act had inspired so many. Emma remained humble through it all. She still rose early each morning to bake her bread and greet her customers with a smile. To her, nothing had changed. She was still just Emma, the girl who ran Sweet Memory. But to the veterans, and to the growing number of people touched by her story, she was much more than that now. Frank visited every morning, offering small bits of advice and quiet reassurance. You will do fine, he would say with a gentle smile. You are the heart of the story. The day before the ceremony, George stopped by with a small gift, a navy blue dress, simple but elegant. We thought you should have something nice to wear, he said softly. Emma was touched beyond words. She accepted the dress with tears in her eyes. That evening, as she locked up the bakery, Emma stood alone in the quiet shop, taking a deep breath. The medal from Frank still rested in its small box near the register. She picked it up, holding it gently. Tomorrow, she would stand before a crowd, not because she had sought it, but because kindness had found a way to shine. The stars glittered above the snowy streets as Emma walked home, heart full of both nerves and gratitude. The morning of the ceremony arrived crisp and clear. Snow still blanketed the city, but the sun shone brightly overhead, its rays glinting off rooftops and windows. Emma woke early, her heart pounding with nervous excitement. She carefully dressed in the navy blue gown George had given her. It fit perfectly, simple and graceful. Frank arrived at her door with George and two other veterans. They had arranged to drive her to the venue in one of the old military jeeps. As they rumbled through the streets, Emma glanced out the window. She was used to the quiet corners of Maple Creek. Now, towering buildings and wide city streets stretched before her. The venue was a grand hall, decorated with flags and banners honoring veterans. Inside, rows of seats were already filled. Reporters and photographers lined the back of the room. Emma's hands trembled slightly as she stepped inside. But Frank walked beside her, steady and calm. You are not alone, he whispered. A hush fell over the room as the ceremony began. A distinguished host took the stage, speaking about service, sacrifice, and the power of compassion. Then Emma's name was called. She rose slowly, her knees weak, and walked to the front of the room. The applause was warm and genuine. Veterans stood in respect as she approached the podium. Emma's voice shook as she began to speak. I never thought something so small could matter so much, she said softly. All I did was offer a jacket. But it taught me that kindness, it reaches farther than we know. The audience listened in rapt silence. Some wiped away tears. Others nodded solemnly. When she finished, the applause rose again, filling the hall. The host stepped forward, presenting her with a framed certificate and a small gold pin. But then, something unexpected happened. Frank rose from his seat and approached the stage. He carried the small wooden box. With trembling hands, he opened it and lifted the medal he had given her. Before everyone, he pinned it carefully onto Emma's dress. "She deserves this more than I ever did," he said, voice steady, "for showing us that no act of kindness is ever too small." The room erupted in applause, louder than before. Emma stood there, tears streaming down her face, overwhelmed by the moment. But the most powerful part of the story was yet to come. The ceremony continued with music and quiet conversation. Emma sat among the veterans, the medal now pinned to her dress. She felt a deep sense of connection, as though she had become part of something much larger than herself. After the official program ended, people mingled in the hall. Emma was approached by strangers, veterans, and reporters. Each wanted to shake her hand or hear her story. In the middle of this, William Carter, the man from the Veterans Organization, approached her once more. "Miss Emma," he said with a warm smile, "there is one more thing we'd like to show you." He gestured toward a side room just off the main hall. Curious, Emma followed, with Frank and George walking close behind. When the door opened, Emma gasped softly. Inside was a large display board, covered in letters, photographs, and drawings. At the center, a large sign read, "Letters of gratitude to Emma." Hundreds of messages had arrived from across the country, veterans who had read her story online, families of service members, children from schools, strangers whose hearts had been touched by a single act of kindness. Emma moved slowly along the board, eyes wide with wonder. One letter caught her attention. It was written in careful handwriting by a young soldier stationed overseas. It read, "I have been far from home for months. Hearing what you did reminded me why we serve. For people like you. Thank you for reminding us that goodness still exists." Emma's hands trembled as she finished reading. Frank placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "You see," he said softly, "this is the true gift. You did not just warm one old soldier. You reminded us all why we matter." Tears streamed down Emma's face. The moment washed over her fully now. One jacket, one simple choice, and it had reached across the world. As the day ended and the veterans prepared to leave, George turned to Emma. "There is one more surprise waiting back in Maple Creek," he said with a twinkle in his eye. Emma looked at him in confusion. "What do you mean?" she asked. George only smiled. "You will see tomorrow." And so, with her heart full and her mind racing with curiosity, Emma rode home beneath a star-filled sky, unaware of the crowd that would be waiting for her the next morning. The story was not over yet.